Hello everyone, and welcome to another Cut-Rate Commander Precon Upgrade Guide, the series in which we give Precon decks a glow-up without breaking the bank. My name's Grazzet, and today we'll be giving the Bloomburrow Family Matters Precon $35 worth of upgrades to bring it up to Cut-Rate standards. As usual though, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you like this content. Consider supporting the channel directly either via my Buy Me a Coffee or my Game Nerds affiliate links in the description if you really like it, and be sure to stick around until the end of the video to see what Precon will be covering next. Also, if you'd like to see my blind reaction and thoughts to the base Precon before any upgrades, you can do so by checking out my first impressions of it also in the description. So, with that out of the way, let's start by taking a look at the commander and playstyle. This deck's face commander is Zinnia Valley's Voice, a 1/3 flying bird bard that costs Jeskai that has the following two abilities. Firstly, Zinnia gets +X+0, where X is equal to the number of other creatures we control with base power 1. And secondly, creature spells we cast have offspring too. Breaking down their core stats, Zinnia possesses a low-to-the-ground CMC, a low power and average toughness stat block for their cost with built-in evasion to let them get in for damage more easily, and a pair of abilities that allow them to create 1/1 token copies of our creatures for value as well as to empower themselves as they do so. Taking a closer look at Zinnia's second ability first, since it's arguably the more powerful of the two, at base it allows us to create a 1/1 token copy of any creature spell we cast so long as we're willing to pay 2 additional mana on top of its original casting cost. Now, on the surface, this simply allows us to double up on all our creature spells, which admittedly won't do much for us in the way of combat since those tokens are still just 1/1s, but does allow us to get twice the value out of any ETB effects those creatures may possess when they come down, as well as get double the mileage out of any passive abilities they may have if we can keep them alive. And while this on its own is certainly impressive, as repeatedly netting twice the value out of most creatures' effects for a relatively low mana investment is nothing to scoff at, its real value, at least in my opinion, is that this ability creates token copies, which synergizes perfectly with Jeskai's existing sources of populate and other token copying effects, allowing us to get even more copies of those creatures and therefore even more usage out of their effects after Zinnia creates the initial token copy. And Zinnia's first ability then positions them to take advantage of this token creation even further, making use of both the 1/1 offspring she creates and our ability to copy those offspring to turn themselves into a deadly commander damage dealing threat, easily allowing them to achieve double-digit power alongside the mass token generators in the base build to potentially 2-shot or even 1-shot opponents that can't block them in the air. So, having seen that our commander cares about 1-power bodies, and allows us to copy our creatures when we cast them to both empower themselves and double up on the value that those creatures generate, it should come as no surprise that we'll be refining this Precon to get the maximum usage out of the tokens Zinnia creates, which we'll be doing by adding in more potent bodies for us to offspring to help pad our core stats for added value, or that can alternatively create more tokens to help us build up our board and empower Zinnia, slotting in a multitude of ways for us to copy our tokens so that we can get even more of them into play, and lastly, putting in a variety of ETB payoffs that can convert our token creation into damage to burn out our opponents, thereby allowing Zinnia to dominate the battlefield as both an overwhelming source of ever-multiplying token bodies and as an ever-growing evasive commander damage-dealing threat themselves. So let us make our way back to the plane of Bloomburrow and to Three Tree City, where if we follow the sounds of jovial songs and lute playing, we'll be sure to find Zinnia entertaining its residents with their bardic skills. But don't mistake this birdfolk for a simple if skilled troubadour, as there's much more to this bard than meets the eye. For example, despite their popularity in the city, no one seems to know anything about their past, as they quite literally crash-landed into the city one day and decided to stay. And despite their usually bumbling demeanor, their graceful skill in combat is known far and wide thanks to them single-handedly battling the fearsome Dragonhawk to save the animal folk of a nearby border town during its rampage, earning them the title of Sovereign of Life. But whether they be a secret noble, an exiled elite guard, or something else entirely, what we do know is that Zinnia is always ready to bring joy and laughter to those around them regardless of their past. So, now that we know a bit more about the commander and their playstyle, let's jump straight into the upgrades. So, seeing as Zinnia's quote-unquote primary ability is to create token copies of our creatures, the very first thing we'll be doing is increasing the number of powerful creatures we can copy, which the base build has a couple of already, but we can easily build upon to make our selection even better. For example, on the token creating front to help build up our board and empower Zinnia, we'll be cutting Plumecrite Escort, which is an okay one-time source of targeting protection, but isn't too useful to copy since we generally can't do so at flash speed to make use of its protection again and again, for Loyal Apprentice, which passively creates hasty evasive 1/1 so long as Zinnia is on board, synergizing nicely with the base builds on damage payoffs to proc them more reliably while boosting Zinnia's power, replacing Blade Splicer, whose one-time token creation is middling while their golem buffing is out of place in this build, with Siege Gang Lieutenant, which gives us more 1/1 bodies each turn so long as Zinnia is alive, and lets us turn those bodies into targeted damage if we have the mana to serve as spot removal or extra reach, letting go of Restoration Angel, whose flicker effect is okay as a one-time source of targeting protection for Zinnia, but not much else in this build, to put in Ultec Matter Weaver, whose ability to tack on extra 1/1 bodies to every creature spell we cast is fantastic to help grow our board, empower Zinnia, and proc our ETB payoffs more often, while also occasionally letting us copy our treasure tokens for extra ramp if we need it. And, as our last token creating body, we'll be swapping out Jazal Goldmane, who's admittedly a decent finisher for our deck since we're going to be going rather wide, to swap in Warren Warleader, which can also provide an AoE stat bump to all our creatures as they attack, lets us offspring it twice alongside Zinnia thanks to its own built-in offspring for a minimum of a +3/+3 AoE stat boost each turn at no mana cost, and, if we need to grow our board with bodies instead, can alternatively create 1/1s until our board is big enough to make use of its pump effect. Then moving on to some offspring targets that are more geared towards padding our core stats to generate us value as we multiply them, we'll be raising the excess Thriving Land, Thriving Isle to make space for the treasure-generating Professional Facebreaker, which can generate a lot of extra mana for us once we start getting extra copies of it on board to help us cast more spells and pay for offspring costs, with the added option to turn those treasures into Impulse Draw if we need the card advantage, sidelining the unimpressive cantripping creature Inspiring Overseer and the awkward-to-use Draw Source Illusionary Ambusher, so we can add in Welcoming Vampire and Rumor Gatherer, both of which take advantage of our constant token creation to generate us a steady stream of card advantage each turn, and replacing Cloud Blazer, which is a bit steep at 7 mana when creating a copy of it to draw us 4, with Muldrifter, which can draw us 4 for 5 if we evoke it with Offspring to let us play it sooner and hopefully still leave us with mana open to play something else. And then as our final pair of new offspring targets, we'll be exchanging out the Titans Inferno Titan and Sun Titan, whose ETB and on-attack effects are admittedly solid, but we'll need to spend a staggering 8 mana if we want to get a token copy of them, which is a bit too much in my opinion, so we'll instead be running the ETB payoffs, Witty Roastmaster and Molten Gatekeeper, both of which weaponize our token creation by turning it into AoE burn and are terrifying targets to copy, easily taking over the game once we start copying the copies and being more than capable of ending the game on the spot if our opponents don't have a board wipe handy. And while on the topic of ETB payoffs, we'll be supplementing the handful of ones included in the base build even further by scrapping the too expensive piece of removal Angel of Ruins, along with the subpar board wipe Time Wipe, to make space for Warleader's Call and Impact Tremors, both of which provide the build with even more AoE burn as we create tokens, this time from the relative safety of our back row, and the former even providing a solid anthem for Zinnia and our tokens to make use of as they swing in, as well as cutting Shield Broker, which is a cute ETB theft effect that we can theoretically make use of, but in practice usually ends up giving the stolen creature back to its owner, making it less than ideal, so we can add in Panharmonicon in its place, which is absolutely fantastic here as a way for us to double up on all our offspring triggers, ETB triggers, and ETB payoffs, functionally making our entire deck twice as effective as soon as it comes down. So, now that we've seen our new additions that we'll be aiming to make copies of, and the ones that care about those copies coming into play, let's switch gears onto some new additions focused around making copies of our copies to get even more mileage out of Zinnia's token creation, since the core build sources of extra tokens, while serviceable, are either entirely or more suited towards making copies of our non-tokens. As such, on the populate side of things, we'll be slotting out another one of our excess thriving lands, this time Thriving Bluff, so we can slot in the one-time populate effect, Rootborn Defenses, which we're honestly running more for the AoE protection it provides our board against wipes, but it can net us an additional copy of our most dangerous token as it does so, which is nice upside, replacing the legend Arthur Marigold Knight, who would be a much better fit helming a build of higher CMC creatures for him to cheat into play rather than being in the 99 here, for the better fitting legend Kaith Famed Mechanist, who can repeatedly populate and gives all our non-tokens fabricate one on top of that to get us even more bodies on board each turn, firing Devilish Valet, which can be a decent finisher but needs a very well established board in order to get any sort of use, to make space for Muster the Departed, which comes down with a 1/1 flying token and then populates on our turn so long as we lose a creature, which should be easy enough considering how many 1/1s we'll be swinging in with and how many removal spells Zinnia will be eating. And lastly, we'll be cutting Chart a Course, which has been made redundant as a draw source due to the new draw-oriented offspring targets that we've added to the deck, so we can add in Song of the World Soul, which tacks on populate to every single spell we cast as soon as it comes down, so we can flood the board with our most dangerous tokens at a breakneck pace. And then to close out our token copying copiers, we'll be adding in a pair of legends to our suite by smelting down the less than impressive cantrip Circuit Mender, so we can make room for Romania 2, whose ability to cheaply create copies of tokens on the turn they come down is solid enough on its own alongside Zinnia to functionally get us another offspring for 1 more mana, but gets even better alongside all our other token copying effects to get us even more copies of previously copied creatures, and Dispersing Storm of Souls, whose token-themed recursion is solid but either requires a lot of graveyard setup or for us to have taken a lot of casualties in order to be really effective, thereby limiting its usefulness, so we'll instead be running Brutaclad Telcor Engineer, whose passive 2/1 token creation and token haste enabling are solid enough on their own, but we're really running thanks to his ability to transform all our tokens into copies of the most powerful token we have on board, which can potentially generate us an insane amount of value or break our opponent's backs on the spot depending on the target we copy. And finally, as we reach the end of our upgrades, we'll wrap up by adding a series of both on and off theme entries to help pad our core stats, in which we'll be cutting the bit too conditional draw source, Rowdy Research, in favor of the bit easier to use and repeatable draw source, Idol of Oblivion, which only requires us to create tokens to generate card advantage rather than having an established board that we're able to swing in with, replacing the much too symmetrical draw spell Cut a Deal for the more on-theme and recently reprinted Skull Clamp, which is now cheap enough to run and works perfectly as a repeatable way for us to turn our excess 1/1s into card advantage, shelving the bit too defensive pseudo board wipe Aetherize to make space for the treasure creating Prosperous Partnership, which comes down with a pair of 1/1s to help enable Zinnia, and then lets us turn all our 1/1s into instant speed sources of treasure generation for insane amounts of ramp we can stockpile for later. And, as our last upgrade, we'll be letting go of Thopter Engineer, whose one-time Thopter token creation and artifact-specific haste enabling are less than impressive in this build, so we can make space for the removal spell Generous Gift, giving us another piece of instant speed interaction that's not tied to our token generation should we need it. So, now that we've covered all 23 cards that we've upgraded from the core build, let's take a look at the breakdown for this Precon upgrade. Looking at the stats that matter to our game plan, we have 19 sources of 1/1 tokens to help build up our board and empower Zinnia, 9 ways for us to create token copies of our creatures and or tokens to help supplement and take advantage of Zinnia's token creation, 11 creatures with ETB effects and 18 creatures with passive effects to give Zinnia plenty of potent creatures to offspring, 10 cards that care about our creatures entering the battlefield to help generate value for ourselves or inflict damage onto our opponents base as we flood the board with tokens, and 8 creatures with 1 base power in our 99 to help give Zinnia just a bit more power alongside our token generation so they can deal more commander damage. For general deck stats, we have 13 ramp sources, 11 card draw sources, 10 targeted removal sources, and 4 board wipes, giving us a pretty typical array of core stats with no real outliers. Looking at our mana curve, we have an average CMC of 3.22, leaving us with a lower weight curve that's actually a bit slower than it may first appear, since we're generally going to be paying 2 more for all our creatures so we can offspring them. As such, we'll be aiming to ramp hard in the early game, dropping Zinnia, then offspringing as many of our creatures as possible from that point forward, building up our board with token sources of value and damage, while Zinnia consistently gets in for commander damage in the sky. This, coupled with our ability to reliably create token copies of our tokens to grow our board and Zinnia even further, should position Zinnia to either beat down our opponents with raw commander damage, or overwhelm them with our army of tokens with powerful effects. The final price of this build then comes out to be $74.76 after upgrades. This price does not include tax or shipping and assumes that the price you paid for the Precon was $40. The price of the cards was calculated by using the cheapest listed marketplace price on TCG Player at the time of this recording. Now, if we want to add even more upgrades by going over budget, we can consider replacing the draw sources Rumor Gatherer and Welcoming Vampire with the Creature Tutors Recruiter of the Guard and Imperial Recruiter, which between hitting 2 toughness or 2 power creatures can bring up exactly the creatures we need to hand over and over again as we copy them. Exchange the token copying Romania 2 with the better token copying Nesting Dovehawk, which is more flexible in its token copying thanks to its populate, and due to not being legendary, can be copied itself for even more populating. And if we want to stretch our bank accounts to the absolute limit, we can remove the cantrip Spirited Companion and the mana dork Ornithopter of Paradise, so we can add in Esper Sentinel and Dockside Extortionist, whose already powerful effects that let us draw cards and ramp us with treasures only get better as we make more copies of them, provided of course our hunger for power in our decks is greater than the hunger in our stomachs, since we likely won't be able to eat for at least a week in order to be able to afford these. Thanks everyone for sticking around until the end of the video. So, with the Family Matters upgrade complete, the next upgrade we'll be tackling will be the back row animating Animated Army Precon and its face commander, Bellow Bard of the Brambles. So look forward to that build coming soon. In the meantime, however, it's time for all you folks to vote on which of the alternate commanders from the Precons you want to see get a build of their own. Those being either the card drawing and creature cheating Mr. Foxglove, the top deck sneak attacking Arthur Marigold Knight, the enchantment cascading Wild Seer Scouring Maw, or the squirrel empowering the Odd Acorn Gang. So be sure to cast your votes, link in the description, before the deadline on August 24th, and let me know in the comments which commander you voted for and which commanders from this set you'd like to see in future polls. And again, before we close out, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy this content to help keep this channel growing. Consider donating to my Buy Me a Coffee or using my Game Nerds affiliate link in the description if you want to support the channel directly. And if you want to see more videos like this one, either click on the videos floating around my head for the latest builds, or click on the card above for a playlist of all the videos I've made so far. And with that, have a good one folks, and stay safe.